Today we'll cover the CELPIP test and how to chart your path to a high score. We're joined today by our guest speaker from CELPIP, Ivan Petrov, who will be sharing key facts with you about the test. As many of you know, taking a language test is an integral part of your immigration journey. Many Canadian immigration programs require a language test as part of the application. And the CELPIP tests are Canada's leading general English tests for immigration, citizenship, and professional designation. And CELPIP is continuously working to make the test-taking process more accessible for test takers, from adding additional locations for test taking to providing results to test takers more quickly. So again, today we're excited to have with us Ivan Petrov to present and to answer some of your questions. Ivan has a wealth of knowledge on English language assessment and will be able to provide insight into this important aspect of the immigration process. So Ivan is the Manager of Business Development for Prometric's language acquisition portfolio for Western Canada, the United States, and Asia. As Manager of Business Development, Ivan supports the assessment mandates of academic institutions, government, and strategic stakeholders, focusing on improving meaningful and equitable outcomes for institutions and learners. In the past, Ivan has served as an account director and manager of academic relations for Prometric's English language and prior learning assessment programs, and spent years working in experiential learning and edtech, focusing on the U.S. academic ecosystem, public policy, and academia. Ivan holds a BA from the University of Toronto and an MA from the University of Toronto's Monk School of Global Affairs. Again, Ivan, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to go into this topic. Ivan will present for approximately 30 minutes. And following this presentation, we'll move into a question and answer period. So please send your questions throughout the presentation that you may have into your chat. We have a couple moderators parsing through your questions, and we'll make sure to get to them in the question and answer period that will follow Ivan's presentation. So at any point, if you have a question, put it in the chat and we'll try to get to it towards the end. Some of you have also shared questions via email before the webinar. We'll get to those in the question and answer period too. Just remember though, that the chat is public. So please do not share any personal details. Don't share your email, don't share your phone number in the chat. And yeah, so following the webinar, you're going to receive an email basically giving you access to Ivan's slides, additional information, and a link to the recording of the webinar so that you can rewatch important parts that you may have missed. So yeah, watch out for that email that'll come out after the webinar. With that being said, I'm gonna hand off to Ivan to present.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Riley and team, for the kind introduction. I'm always particularly excited to get in front of candidates and test takers from all over the world. Part of the reason why I enjoy doing this is because my journey into Canada was started in Bulgaria in the Balkans, and I still very much relate to the entire journey and how important and comprehensive it can be. Language testing, as Riley outlined, is just one part. It is a crucial part, but it's just one part of your entire journey. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share our knowledge and give you some pointers about how to approach language assessment for the purposes of permanent residency and citizenship. Throughout the presentation, I'll pause a couple of places so that I really want to leave you with a map of the journey that we have created for test takers, regardless of the place where you are in terms of your English language facility. What I'm really hoping to do is to leave you with enough pointers and enough points of contact so that you do appreciate that it is a journey. There's a lot of support throughout it. With that, the first thing that I'd like you to consider is, again, it's a map of where you are. We always suggest to folks to look at the sessions that we always present, including the ones with CIC News, as a starting point. But immediately from there, please know that there are free practice tests and a great way to learn more about what CALE is and which areas of the test you need more preparation for. I will also showcase what that prep material looks like, and ideally we'll come to an understanding of where to go to look for some of those materials and where you can actually look for help as well. In terms of the basics, in case some of you are wondering what CELPIP stands for, it is the Canadian English Language Proficiency Index Program, a mouthful to be sure, but the first three letters here are most important, and that is the reason why that is because it's Canadian English language, i.e. It is the only all-Canadian exam accepted for permanent residency or citizenship applications. It is fully computer delivered and assesses all 4 English language skills. CELPIP focuses on functional proficiency, which means that it assesses a test taker's ability to use English in day-to-day situations. While some of these situations may involve an academic context or a workplace context, it's important to understand and alleviate some of the apprehension that may be associated with the fact that some folks expect that they may be tested on some academic concepts, which isn't the case here. Even though CELPIP features a range of levels of formality, with some being quite casual, such as reading an email, for instance, from a family member, which we will see later in the presentation, or listening to a chat between coworkers, while others may be more formal, such as responding to a survey from a city government, for example. Also important to note, as I mentioned a moment ago, it was developed by language experts at the University of British Columbia. So in that, it is very Canadian, and it serves the purposes of testing everyday English within the Canadian context. There are, there are 2 versions of CELPIP. As mentioned before, the CELPIP General is used predominantly for proof of general English proficiency for those applying for permanent residency in Canada. It is also accepted by quite a few organizations. So if you are applying to work in a certain sector and they ask for English language proficiency, then you can ask if they accept CELPIP General. This test also assesses all 4 English language skills, so reading, writing, listening, and speaking, and takes about 3 hours to complete. On the other hand, the CELPIP General, LS, tests only listening and speaking, and therefore takes about an hour and 10 minutes, mainly used as proof of general English proficiency when you're applying for Canadian citizenship. One of the main reasons why we feel that CELPIP is a great choice for your English language proficiency examination in coming to Canada is the availability. There are over 140 CELPIP test centers across Canada and internationally. New test centers are being opened as we speak, and as Riley mentioned at the top of the hour. So it's always a good idea to check frequently and find out the closest one to you. There are weekly test dates across Canada and internationally, including evenings and weekends. So again, at the end of the presentation, we'll leave you with enough information where you can actually go and check availability and dates and scheduling and all that. For those of you who are in Canada, there are 18 locations in BC. There are 8 in Alberta, more than 20 in Ontario, 3 in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, New Brunswick, respectively, 2 in Quebec and Nova Scotia, and 1 in Newfoundland and Labrador. Another group of reasons why you would consider CELPIP, for instance, is, again, I mentioned that it is the all-Canadian test, meaning, again, that it is measured, it is created in Canada, and it measures English language proficiency specifically in the Canadian context. But other reasons are the fact that online results are available in 4 to 5 days. In fact, I think that time period was reduced recently to 3 to 4 days, and all of those results are available within your account as soon as you create one on celpip.ca. Free study materials, of which there are many, and I will make a point of telling you in depth what those are, as well as downloadable score reports. Again, the point here is that it is meant to be a very user-friendly experience, one that gives you all of the tools that you need to succeed within your application to immigrate to Canada. Most importantly here to note about the reasons why CELPIP is a great assessment tool is the fact that it uses Canadian accents in the listening passages. So for those of you who are already in Canada, this will be, you know, an easy thing to accomplish because we're not going to test anything that you haven't heard yet in your day-to-day interactions. For folks who may be coming from abroad and haven't had the Canadian experience, this also means that by virtue of testing or preparing for CELPIP, you really do get a good impression of what the Canadian language use really looks like here in Canada. And another important thing to note is that the vocabulary that's used throughout the test will not be difficult to understand expressions from other forms of English, such as British or Australian English. So again, the point here is it's both a great tool to give you an impression of what you're going to experience in terms of everyday language use. And for those of you who are already in Canada, you might have a bit of a leg up in terms of hearing something that is very, very familiar. There's also, as I mentioned before, a number of organizations that accept CELPIP. I always encourage folks to obviously look at the IRCC website to find out the respective band that they need to achieve in terms of the score itself, but also finding out whether the organizations that are pertinent to the field of work that you are trying to enter in Canada also accept CELPIP. There are a number of those. What you're looking at on the screen here are just a few, and at the end of the presentation, we will tell you where you can actually go and find out whether the organization that you are interested in working with or being certified by accepts CELPIP score reports as well. Another important thing to note is that both CELPIP and the Canadian Academic English Language Exam, which Prometric administers as well, are now accepted as part of the SDS program, which is the Student Direct Stream pathway from IRCC. Effectively, if you haven't heard of it, it's a fast track to processing study permits for certain international students. Most SDS applications are processed within 20 days, which is nothing to frown upon. You can always go on the IRCC website to find out whether the country from which you are applying is a part of the SDS stream, and if obviously the study permit route may be available to you. Again, another avenue that you can explore with your CELPIP score once you take the exam. This part here is probably one of the most important things that I always want to stress to folks. And the reason why this is, so first of all, maybe you're familiar with the Canadian language benchmarks, which is the effective way that IRCC uses to explain language requirements for permanent residency and citizenship applications. It's always useful to remember that both CELPIP and the CLBs share the same 12-point scale, which leaves nothing to the imagination in terms of where you need to be depending on the requirement for your particular pathway for immigration to Canada. One other thing that I want to stress here is there is increasing evidence to suggest that a very high or a higher CLB level, particularly when it comes to sections like reading, is mapped out to suggest quicker and more meaningful employment outcomes. I mean, things that we have always thought about in terms of assumptions. In other words, the higher your score, the better your chances of finding meaningful and a meaningful work when you get to Canada. But now the data is emerging. And in fact, I'll direct you to the CIC news website for a recent article on the subject. In other words, whichever test you take, please make sure that you take the time to study for it, because particularly when it comes to sections like reading, the higher your score, the higher your chances of finding meaningful employment. Just very briefly, the CLBs, we talked about the CLBs and the band descriptors for CELPIP. This is what your official score report would look like. Again, 3 to 4 days as a turnaround time. And the score report, importantly nowadays, includes an average score for score users that require this component. And when I say score users, I mean organizations to which you may be applying, as well as IRCC. Those are the entities to which you will be sending your score reports so they can assess based on their own requirements. Now, a little bit about the test information, about the features, format, and strategy that we typically suggest to folks to employ. I won't go into too much depth here because I will leave you with enough information about the in-depth webinars that we have for each individual section. But what I'm hoping to do is that I'll share some of my own and the team's experience in terms of how we go about the general strategies that we recommend for people to employ. This is a general overview, first and foremost, of how the timing of each test is organized. Remember that CELPIP General covers each of the 4 skills, but CELPIP General LS assesses listening and speaking only. So each part of the test is just under an hour, except for speaking, which is only about 20 minutes. The reason why I'm putting this in front of you so that you can understand the overall time requirement, the fact that everything is divided into sections. And as you prepare for the test, it will be very important to keep that in mind, because time management is crucial, and more on that in a moment. Very briefly, the first feature of the test is the listening, where effectively the component of the listening section are as follows. You have an audio passage, which is typically previewed. In other words, the test will give you an indication of what to expect. It will then play once. The questions will come after the audio. You will have a pen and paper, and I'll give you more pointers on note-taking, which is equally important here. And the timers will help you manage your time allocation. One thing to also consider is here and in a few other passages of the test, the passages and questions will get progressively harder. So It's important to keep this in mind. Even if you're prepared to take the test right now, reason why we're showing you this is so that you know what to expect in each of these individual sections. In terms of a few important strategies that we always suggest to folks to employ, when it comes to the listening test, look for pauses, look for intonation changes, look for stressed words, and listen for the information that contains the main topic, the key details, facts, and then distinguish those from opinions. A pause can mean, for instance, that the speaker is about to express a new idea. So that's a really good indicator that the thing that follows or the sentence that follows after that pause is something that you should probably be paying attention to and therefore taking a note of. And speaking of notes, we would always suggest using abbreviations and symbols, organizing your notes. And when it comes to the organization of notes, I think no individual pathway or modus operandi is better than the other. Whatever works for you effectively. Definitely use point form or bullet points, identifying the main ideas and the important supporting details, such as dates, a sequence of events. If it helps you to really map it out in a sense, that is all a good strategy. But most importantly, as I said earlier, listen for verbal cues and write down keywords and phrases only, as opposed to paraphrasing entire sections. Some of this may be self-evident and explanatory, but you'll be surprised if you don't hear this, even again, if you're ready to write the exam tomorrow, as it were, if you don't hear these pointers before, sometimes in the heat of the moment, you end up spending too much time that you don't necessarily have. So again, pay attention to the cues, and again, focus on what you understand rather than what you don't understand. Take useful notes, and this can take the form of a map of sorts, but definitely just individual bullet points. Listen for main points, listen for the pauses and changes of tone, intonation, and register, and recognize key details, and look for paraphrased ideas and answers, eliminating incorrect answers, and most importantly, answer every question, even if you're not sure. This is probably my most important and my favorite part of the test is just you need to answer everything to the best of your ability. Leave no sections unanswered. Moving on to reading. Important thing to consider here is that the main reading passage is always going to be on the left of the screen. Instructions in work area are on the right. And then countdown timers will help you manage your time. And again, it's very important to consider that time management piece. As always, passages and questions will get harder. So one of the things that I find useful to think about when preparing for the test is always know that in the beginning of each section, you will be given a preview, and the first one or two questions will give you a taste for what to expect, but the difficulty of the questions will increase as you go further into that particular section. Here is an example of what the test format for the reading section looks like. As I mentioned, on the left, you have the actual test, and everything that you need to work with is on the right. A few pointers here in terms of how to approach this particular section. Obviously, preview the test screen. Don't spend too much time on that. Skim the passage, read the questions, scan the passage for answers, and answer all the questions, even if you're not sure about the particular individual answers. Reading strategies. As I mentioned, skim the main text for 30 to 40 seconds maximum. Aim for general understanding. In other words, ask yourself the question, what is this paragraph about? Watch for main ideas and key details to be paraphrased in answer choices. Another thing that I've always employed in my own studies is eliminating incorrect answers. That's always useful. Some of them will be glaringly obvious, so you can definitely employ that as a strategy. And keep moving through the questions, making sure you answer each one before the time is up. And as we always point out, answer every question, even if you are unsure. Moving on to writing. Again, as in previous sections, the background information will be on the left and then specific instructions on the right. You also have basic editing tools, including a word counter and spell check. And the word counter comes very handy because you have 150 to 200 words per task invariably. So takes about an hour to complete, and you'll have 2 tasks in the writing test, each with that word counter of 150 to 200 words. And important thing to note here is that the raters that rate the writing parts are typically, there's a few of them, as well as if they don't agree on a score, they bring in a third rater. So you don't have to worry. As much as it's important to pay attention and do your utmost in terms of the writing ability, it's also, you shouldn't really stress about the fact that if people are not aware of, are not able to find or agree on a particular rating, there's always going to be a third opinion that's asked. So we try to be as fair and impartial as possible. Because again, writing isn't something that comes naturally to many of us, yours truly included in that number. The first task when it comes to writing requires that candidates write an email. In this example, you're writing to a restaurant manager complaining about a bad meal. And the question here is, how formal do you think this email should be? And the short answer to that is, it cannot be super informal, it cannot be formal, it has to be somewhere in the middle. This is not an email to a friend or a family member, but also it's not an email to your local member of parliament. The point here is, again, we're testing every day language proficiency. So it is very likely that you would have encountered this situation, even if it's not necessarily in English. You would have encountered it in your actual first mother tongue, for instance. So you would know how formal or informal you would have to be. You have to kind of gauge your answer based on that. Moving on to some writing strategies. Where are we here? Okay, the second writing task. Lost my slides here for a second. Apologies for this. Okay, so the writing strategies. To summarize, read instructions carefully. Usually asked to do 3 things. Take a few minutes to brainstorm and create an outline. Develop your ideas using supporting details and examples. Divide your main ideas into paragraphs, and give yourself a few minutes to check your work at the end. Finally, when it comes to the speaking component, It is the shortest part of the CELPIP test. It takes just 15 to 20 minutes. Some tasks have text only and others have text with an image. You will be given some time to prepare before the speaking time, and your responses will be recorded by a computer and rated by human raters later. One of the things that I enjoy about this part is the fact that you're not necessarily speaking to a real person. You're not speaking to a rater that's evaluating your performance in real time, which for a lot of folks who may be apprehensive about speaking to an actual person is actually good news. In other words, again, you will submit your answer. It will be rated by human raters at a later date. And just as in the previous section, if those human raters don't agree on a particular score, they will bring in a third person. But the point here is that you can rest assured that you are speaking into a microphone and your response is being recorded to be evaluated at a later date. Some of the speaking strategies that we always recommend that candidates employ: be prepared to express your own ideas and opinions, particularly when you're tasked with talking about, let's say in this particular case, a great time you had with a family member or friend. You can talk about a party, something you did together at school. So not a difficult thing to do, but be unafraid to express your own ideas and opinions, because those are the ones that actually allow you to present a cogent response. Follow the instructions carefully, provide clear and focused responses, and include details and examples. The details and examples part in particular is, in a lot of cases, the determining factor between a really good score on this section. You'll be surprised, but let's say if you were describing this image here, you can definitely start, for instance, with an overall description of what this is. But then the more detail you give, let's say, about the person that's actually stretching on the left, or the person who's about to launch a paper airplane, those are the things that actually make a difference when you're going for a higher score. The more detail, the better. As the slide suggests, choose things in the image that you're comfortable talking about, but also use strong descriptive vocabulary. Now, as we mentioned in the beginning of our session, this here is the map that I really like folks to be mindful of. So in other words, regardless of when you're watching this, whether you're getting the slides just after the presentation and you're with us right now, or you're watching this at some later date, please remember, I think this is slide number 30, the map of where we feel you really have a great idea of how to access all the prep material that we offer, and really think of CELPIP as not necessarily or not just an assessment tool, but a really pertinent way to increase your language proficiency. And as I said earlier, aim for the score that you deserve and require, and also make sure that that gives you a leg up when you are here in Canada or applying for opportunities. You will always have the ability to find a CELPIP general overview session similar to the one we're conducting right now. There are a number of ways you can do that on the CELPIP website, but chief among those is creating an account on celpip.ca, because immediately when you do this, you get 2 free online practice tests, as suggested in the diagram, as well as the CELPIP Accelerate Starter. So both of these are incredible starting points, particularly the Accelerate Starter, which I will go into depth in a moment. But please pay attention to this particular part, because those two, I would think, are a must, as we have suggested in the little outline here. What you do from there is effectively optional. We have charted pertinent ways for you to kind of get to where you need to be, but those 3 are super important. And so, as I mentioned, you get 2 complete free tests available directly to you when you create an account. There's also over 20 episodes presented by CELPIP experts with study tips for your test through the CELPIP podcast, webinars and info sessions. Again, all of this is included directly when you create an account. You can always join a free webinar or info session, and you'll see that when you go to our YouTube channel, for instance, there are a number of focused test component specific sessions, as well as recorded versions available directly on YouTube. And when you actually get the Accelerate starter that I mentioned a moment ago, those contain videos, quizzes, and practice questions, 5 hours for CELPIP General and 2.5 hours for the shorter version, CELPIP General LS. Now, a more in-depth reading of the resources that I just outlined, the CELPIP overall, the CELPIP General overview, which is 90 minutes long, and it features a comprehensive overview of all of the features and format of the test. The Listening Pro, which is 2 hours and kind of goes into format, strategies, and sample questions for the listening parts. The Reading Pro, which is another 2 hours, same format, strategies, and sample questions. Where it gets really interesting in my mind, the Writing Pro, which targets CLB 5, achieving level 5 or higher on the writing test. Super useful for those that are really aiming for that particular benchmark, as well as sorry, I lost my thing here, as well as Writing Pro Target 9+, again, for those high achievers. Same situation here for Speaking Pro Target 5 and Speaking Pro Target 9+. Very briefly, we offer a number of CELPIP live sessions presented by members of our marketing team, and Brandy, who is our consummate CELPIP expert. Tons of experience teaching and delivering webinars. Also, there are a number of resources that you can avail yourself of, again, on the YouTube channel at CELPIP Official. So study tips, introductions, study tips to listening, to reading, speaking, and writing. The official CELPIP podcast, again, all of this is available directly as resources and free of charge for everyone that creates an account, as well as another very important tool here, and that is the score comparison chart. This is where you get detailed level descriptions for each CELPIP level for speaking and writing. They're available as PDF downloads, as well as multiple sample resources, responses for 2 tasks for each level. And my favorite part, in-depth analysis of each sample response. Again, all of what I'm outlining here is free of charge, and I would really encourage folks to avail themselves of all of these resources. Again, I'll refer to slide number 30 to kind of see a map of where those reside on your journey. And at the tail end of all of this, we do have prep materials that you can purchase. The CELPIP practice tests, for instance, for General LS and General, the $25 and $35 each, respectively. These are super comprehensive, 11 sets of practice tests, each with 2 complete tests. One in each set contains sample speaking and writing responses at multiple levels and instant results for the listening and reading tests, which, again, super useful. Once you have figured out where your focus needs to be on particular sections of the test, if you have the ability to purchase some of these materials, That really gets you to where you need to be. And conversely, for CELPIP Accelerate, which is not CELPIP Accelerate Starter, but this is the actual CELPIP Accelerate. If you ever wanted to do a self-directed learning program with 30 plus instructional videos in each version, think of this as an actual course that is self-directed, and you can actually complete it completely on your own in your own pace. Finally, I always encourage folks to look at our ebooks section. There are 2 of those, each covering 2 skills on the test, providing in-depth discussions of strategies required for each part of the test, framed around a complete practice test. So each book contains complete practice tests for the respective skills and an online component for the listening sections. All of this available in ebooks. As I promised earlier, so CELPIP.ca is our main point of contact. The bookstore website is on your screen as well. For any questions that pertain to scheduling dates, to creating accounts, to finding nearest locations, info@celpip.ca, and Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Particularly important for me to mention CELPIP Official on YouTube, where you can avail yourself of all of the information that I shared earlier. And with that, I've probably gone over. Riley, I wanted to thank everyone again for listening, and I'll give it over to you for a Q&A.
Awesome. Again, thanks so much for taking the time to go through this in detail. We're really appreciative. Big fan of these webinars. I think that there's a lot to learn and a lot of information, which is why I want to remind people that don't worry, we're going to send you these slides. We're going to post the video. So if there's a section that you want to hear again, or maybe you want to double check your notes, look out for the email that we're going to send you tomorrow with the webinar slides and the recording of this webinar. Ivan, thank you so much once again for taking the time to present to us. And we've got a bunch of great questions from the audience that we're going to answer now. If you have more questions during the Q&A period, make sure to put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible. So don't stop asking questions, or if you have a follow-up, you can ask your follow-up. So I think the most common question we get is there a CELPIP test in Rwanda, in the UK, in the US? A lot of people have been asking that. In general, where do I go to find the nearest CELPIP test location to me?
I will here. I will post the actual link momentarily in the chat. But the reality is that CELPIP.ca is your best point of contact and reference for this. But the actual link will be available momentarily. As I mentioned earlier, with the map of all the test centers, it's always a good idea to keep checking that availability often, because CELPIP is growing. And for instance, I don't know whether Rwanda is on there yet, but I have heard the name Rwanda, for instance, internally in our operations team. So look out for that.
Awesome. There's a couple of questions about, I guess, what taking the test online means. Can you take the test online anywhere? Or maybe, I guess, you can go into detail about what it means to take the test on a computer.
Right. This is a great question. And I forgot to mention and outline one very simple point, and that is the fact that it's computer delivered doesn't mean that it's available online. For the purposes of IRCC, it's important to note that it is computer delivered, but it's computer delivered within test centers only, which is one of the reasons why, again, test center availability matters.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Great. That's clear now too. A few people. So Misan asked this question for the reading portion. Given that it's online, can I use computer shortcuts like copy and paste and Control F?
I'll have to get back to you on this, but I think the tools that are given within the that particular section are fairly user-friendly. I've done it myself, and it's I don't know if you necessarily want to be using shortcuts. If it's possible, we can get back to people and actually answer this question specifically.
Right. Great. Thanks. So I guess maybe we'll look into the website and see if we can share that information.
Yeah.
Or link to that information later. Yatunde wants to take the CELPIP exam in April and is asking about the enrollment process. What does that look like? What does it take to enroll into a test? Do you require ID? Obviously, payment.
Yeah, great question. Again, I will point to the website, and I'll give you the exact link in a moment. But it's fairly simple. You create an account directly on celpip.ca. From there, you look for a test date, and I'm posting this as we speak. That gives you the availability in your nearest test center. Once you click on the date that pertains to you or is most convenient for you, the website will guide you through the required documents. One thing to note here is that you need to use the same ID that you put in directly during the scheduling session, and that's the one ID that you have to show up with during on test day, even though you will be photographed in most cases in the test center.
Awesome. Mateus says, is the CELPIP General LS considered by IRCC for permanent residents?
The CELPIP General LS is only considered for citizenship applications. So to outline again, CELPIP General contains 4 parts and therefore is the most comprehensive test that's accepted by IRCC for permanent residency and citizenship applications, whereas CELPIP General LS is strictly for citizenship applications.
Got it. Mateus had another good question, which was in the writing section, will usage of American-style words count as a mistake, like check versus check?
Great question. No, the short answer to that is anything in the North American vocabulary is accepted. And in fact, the test development team has made sure that those are all included. It's a different question, perhaps, if a test taker used a very specific Australian reference, of which I know there are many, so that might be a thing that the test doesn't recognize. But sure enough, test raters are, at the end of the day, folks responsible for rating these exams. So please be assured that even if you were to utilize some vernacular or some particular idiom from another English vernacular, you would still be rated properly.
Awesome. Moji Sola asks, if I have a speech impairment or if someone has a speech impairment, how will that affect the speaking portion of the test? And I guess in general, does CELPIP maybe have more information on people, on I guess, accommodations for people?
That's a wonderful question. I am putting in the chat the particular section that outlines all types of special accommodations on CELPIP, but rest assured that that's something that isn't obviously news, and there are a number of accommodations that are available for people, including for the speaking section.
Awesome. Hermogenes asked, once you enroll in a CELPIP test, if you have a valid reason to cancel, what's the rescheduling process like?
So another great question. You can reschedule your test sitting twice for free with a 2 business day notice. You can even cancel your test sitting as long as you give 9 days in advance and get 50% as a refund. but you can do all of that directly within your CELPIP account. And as I said, if you have to change your date, no issues. You can do it twice for free.
Mm-hmm. Deweet asks, is there some place I can just do like a practice test for free to see what my score would be like, and then commit to the real test, I guess, when I know more?
Yeah, and so I'll refer back to slide number 30. Again, for all intents and purposes, the thing that I want to leave people with today is go back to slide number 30, because this is where you can find all of the information that's available, including answering this question, and that is, you have two free online practice tests. Both will give you scores. And one of the things that you can potentially do is use the first one, and the reason why we've put it up there prominently as step one, as it were, is use it as a diagnostic tool to give yourself an idea of the score. Then go through the practice evolution and test out, as it were. And if you're still not convinced, then maybe spend a little bit of money and get the accelerate option, which will give you another few tests that you can practice until you're very comfortable.
Awesome. Wei Che asks, does the test location affect my score? Is the test different in different places? Are they graded differently if I take it in Canada versus Nigeria?
It is all uniform. Actually, this is a great question, and it probably warrants a more comprehensive answer, but this is why CELPIP is such a comprehensive assessment tool. It is in like the uniformity and the comprehensiveness of the test is embedded directly in the testing development process. Therefore, the way you test in Nigeria is exactly the same as you test anywhere else, including Canada. It's completely uniform. So to answer that specific question, the score is not location dependent at all.
Awesome. Pamelia just asked, is changing the test location included in that free change too? Or do you have to commit to the same test location?
The test location can also be changed within that to free change option.
Amazing. Ray asked, if I register an account in CELPIP, is it a lifetime account? Do you have free access forever?
You do. To the free, to the free materials, that's a lifetime access, yes. I'm pausing here for a moment because some of the materials may be dependent on you actually scheduling a test date, but rest assured that the moment you create an account on CELPIP, you do have quite a significant amount of access forever, basically.
Amazing. Is the test available on weekends? Yatunde asks.
It is, and we've made a particular point to ensure that there are test sittings for weekends. Now, I'm not necessarily sure that these weekend test dates are more sought after than weekdays. I don't know what the ratio is, but they're definitely available. Part of that being the fact that folks taking CELPIP are not necessarily students, they're working professionals. So short answer to that is yes, weekend dates are available uniformly everywhere.
Awesome. So somebody asked if, is it normal for people to take multiple different kinds of language tests? Why would you, if I've already taken a language test, maybe take the CELPIP and try that out?
I've only heard anecdotal evidence from candidates, and it's very specific and very personal as an experience. Some folks would take CELPIP, for instance, because they think that by not speaking to a human during the speaking portion, they would do better. Again, it's a psychological preference, I think, in that particular case. I've also heard of candidates who would take several tests just so that they can see if the format, for instance, or some of the available features, such as the question about shortcuts, if this is a thing that gives them a leg up for a particular test, then they wouldn't mind trying it out. so the short answer to that is, those are some of the reasons why I've heard folks may want to take an additional test, but the most common one is they didn't get the desired score the first time around, and then they would go on perhaps Reddit and find out what the experience of other test takers may have been. Last thing I'll say on the subject, though, is, and regardless of which test you decide to take, the prep part of each test, I think, is very important, because at the end of the day, I would like for folks to think about this as a way to increase their language proficiency and therefore their confidence as they are embarking on this otherwise very comprehensive journey.
Awesome. So that wraps up our time for today. Ivan, thank you so much. We got a lot of great questions in this webinar session too. So I hope that most people got their questions answered, but feel free to keep the questions coming in the email reply, and maybe we'll get to some of them offline as well. We have more of these webinars planned and upcoming, so stay tuned and pay attention to your email inbox. Ivan, is there any, I guess, closing words or course of action you want to tell people to do before we close up?
Apart from a great deal of thanks to everyone who joined, and thank you and the team for the opportunity to get in front of such a diverse crowd, we're always super grateful for that. So that's one thing. And the second thing, I would always encourage everyone on this webinar, as well as folks who are looking at this at a later date, go back to slide number 30 and think of this as a journey that's really there for you, and the resources are definitely there to ensure a great score, as we said in the title.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, so once again, super thankful to Prometric for joining us and teaching us. We will send out in 24 hours a copy of the slides to the webinar, where you'll have access to that important slide 30. And then also you will have access to a replay of this webinar. We'll send you the link where you can go through it in case you missed the beginning or you missed the end. And thank you everyone for joining. Thanks again, Ivan. And this wraps up our session. Have a nice day, evening, or afternoon, everyone.
Many
Bye.
thanks. Take care.